Part two of the Shukri Wrights podcast with your host, Shukri Wrights, alongside Casey Stern of Bleav Podcast Network. Back here in continuation talking to baseball talk as we are now officially in spring training 2023. And it feels so good to say that, despite the fact that I look outside of my house and I see snow and we're getting into the snowstorm. But yeah,
I miss
baseball
the
warm.
snow. Go ahead. I see. It's funny how like things change. I've been down in Atlanta 8 years, and I'm from New York originally my whole life. I miss it. Now I miss it. Now I wish we could reverse roles. It's like, man, I don't want to shovel it or drive in the ice, but I do miss the snow. So
Oh yeah.
at least there's hey, the good news is soon it will melt, and then it'll be humid as hell, and you'll be complaining about that because that's the Northeast.
Yeah,
So,
that technically is.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right about that.
Yep.
And I want to touch on something while we still have this time left.
Sure.
And I saw a tweet of yours earlier that really got me thinking, and in a way it kind of touched me. And although I'm still getting to know you as a person, still getting to know you through collaboration, talking to each other on the podcast and whatnot, I don't know much about your story and what has transpired for you over the last year or two and whatnot. So I want to ask you, like, how have you arrived at this current point in time in your life after going through such a difficult and trying time in your life previously?
Well, I went through I went through a very easy kind of portion of my life in terms of, I worked real hard to build a career, and I had got blessed with 3 beautiful children, and things were at the point where, I had earned and worked hard, but you felt like you're kind of climbing on top of some mountain, and you're Teflon, nothing can hit you. And then I went through, back to back really kind of, traumatic and scary situations with my family. One with my kids, and then a year later with me. And when you have children, and for parents who are watching and listening, I mean, it's a weird thing. I mean, I've seen it with athletes too. When they've got kids, it's your whole life changes. Everything becomes about more than just yourself. So when your kids are struggling or in trouble or go through something traumatic, it's something that's hard for you. And then you don't have that strength that you used to kind of fight anything that might make you vulnerable for yourself. And I had that and went through that in my life at probably the toughest time for me to do that, and dealt with anxiety, which, I've been clinically diagnosed for over 20 years. And I've talked about that many times on the air. I'm not embarrassed by that. There's, anybody who goes through life has things that they deal with. We just now are in such a world where we haven't normalized that it's okay, and this, it's not, I think I used to joke, like during COVID and the pandemic, I feel like everyone realized when someone asked, what's it like to have anxiety? Do you remember the pandemic? What you felt then is what I felt for the last 20 years.
That's a
That's
great
like
point.
Everybody's gone through it at some point, right? Everybody has stress in their life and has anxiety. But, then I dealt with trauma, and even dealt with abuse in my life, and it led to me being in a very low place where I was having a struggle and a hard time finding the strength I used to have to get through stuff. And one of the things that I found was the importance of being able to admit that and be honest about it and take ownership. Because for a long time, I would say to everybody in my life, I got you, and I got this, and I got that, and eventually you're trying to be some hero. Like, you're trying to be a hero for your kids, you're trying to be it for your family, you're trying to be it for your loved ones, the girl, the guy you're trying to impress, the coworkers and the boss you're trying to impress. And we don't got this all the time. And as men, and this is, please understand, I got not you, but for people, I got 2 daughters, and I grew up with a single mom. But I say this when I say as men, in the kind of the reverse way. Men are told and forced to believe that it's weak to admit vulnerability. It's weak to be emotional. It's weak to care. It's weak to. It's just how we are. I mean, especially if you like work in sports, athletes have to deal with this all the time. It's why they have such a hard time. Austin Meadows, who I've gotten to know over the years, of the Tigers, had to, formerly of the Rays, had to, take off the end of this past season because of things he was going through with anxiety. And, those things are really hard. We all remember the Simone Biles situation a couple of years, like,
Yes.
people doing that in the public eye, that is remarkable. Like the things Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan and others have talked about,
Yeah.
because we haven't normalized that as a guy, it's okay to say, yeah, I got emotions. Yeah, I got stressed out. No, I couldn't handle it. Like, no, it wasn't easy. I needed help. I needed to talk to somebody. I need to rely on people, right? And lean on others. So, for me, I talk about it now because, I've been blessed enough to find clarity and strength and to overcome the things I was dealing with. And for me, I know how difficult it is because you feel so much pressure to have got everything, to just be honest that you don't. So I talk about it because I want people to normalize that it's okay. Like, it's like there's nothing wrong with you, if, and even if there is, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, everybody going through stuff, everybody going to have struggles. I mean, you get an illness in your family, or you go through something tragic, and I've been through that too, and a lot of us have. Like, that feeling you get may not go away. And if it doesn't go away, it's not going to go away with time. It's going to go away with ownership of that feeling. It's going to go away with discussing it. So I think for anybody who's listening, who's young or old, male or female, athlete, no matter what you do, like, look, I'm sure it's very tough for, I know, like, police officers and firefighters, and this is your superheroes. Like, what do you mean? Like, you can't go fight a fire and, like, you anxious, like you got depression or you're dealing with sadness. Like, you're not allowed to, right? I mean, you're supposed to be there defending us, but these are humans. And I feel like for athletes, they deal with this all the time where they're not allowed to expose that. So for me, I just want to normalize that emotion and let people know that it's okay. Now, I went through some some stuff, and a lot of it was not my fault, and a lot of it was very difficult, but I came out the other side, and I came out the other side because I owned it, and because I realized that I needed to make sure that I put myself in a better mental place, and I think that's okay to admit. Yeah, so I'm proud of that. Proud of that.
No, I'm proud of you
But
because
thank you, man. Appreciate
because
that.
like because
Thank
like
you.
I don't know how many people would have been able to to have gone through and deal with what you've dealt with. And when you talk about anxiety, I myself know all about it because I had been dealing with it since June of 2020. Um, and those that are listening or going to be watching this podcast later know, and I've been extremely open about my battles with anxiety. Like my first time I had my anxiety attack was literally weeks after George Floyd. This was in the midst. This is June 2020. We're in the midst of the pandemic, and there are demonstrations happening all across the country. And I'm just out and about on a Friday afternoon, and picked up some insomnia cookies, and all I remember was getting on the train to go into downtown, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it was like a complete smack to the face, and I'm thinking I'm going to die. Like I didn't know it at the time, but I thought I was literally going to die. And I remember switching trains between the green line and the red line, to go to check myself into the hospital. I was literally terrified, like here I am again, feeling like the walls are like closing in, and you're about to get crushed alive. And I get checked out. The doctors checked me out and everything, and they're like, you have no health issues. It was sounds like you make. Did you have? Did you ever had like anxiety? I'm like, no. Up until that point, I never dealt with anxiety in my life. That was the beginning of my battles with anxiety. And you mentioned about the pandemic, and I was like, yeah, that the pandemic literally brought out that in a lot of
A
people,
lot of people. It did for a lot of people.
but especially as men, like we're talking
Yes.
talking man to man, because
Yes,
I
absolutely.
am going to specifically talk about this because I understand the anxiety portion. I get it
Yep.
100%.
Yep.
And I also understand the stigma that surrounds
Oh, without a doubt. You're not
like
allowed.
men, but you're not allowed to talk about it.
Yep.
Like the thing
Yep.
that makes me feel disheartened in this regard is that if you're in a relationship, or if you're engaged or married, I'm not saying this is always the case, but I'm saying that this happens in a lot of relationships. You can't show your emotions or show your weakness, otherwise you're perceived
Yes, as
as
weak. That's
weakness.
correct. Yep.
And that's the part in which why there's such a high rate of men unfortunately committing suicide.
Yep.
That
Yep.
there it is right there.
Yep.
So when you talk
Yep.
about being
Preach. Yep.
when you talk about being vulnerable, being open about it,
Yep.
I didn't understand it at first because my high school brother who told me this at the beginning when I was dealing with it, and he was like, the thing that I find amazing about it is that you are open about it. I'm like, I don't get it. Why is that a big deal? Because he explained to me, this is someone that has been dealing with anxiety and depression for a very long time. I've known him now for over 17 years. He said, because a lot of us, we do not know how to talk about it. It's not easy to talk about. So for you to even be publicly as open as you've been about it, there's a great deal of strength in it. And honestly, I meant when I said that I'm genuinely proud of, because I know firsthand it's not easy. And a lot of men, even though you'll have conversations, but they still struggle with it.
Yeah, look, I think people are afraid of emotion, and people are afraid of being honest about emotion.
Yeah.
So, what happens is that, like, it'll happen even here, and I think about it even like when I tweet something out, like there are people who will be like, oh, well, God bless you for being honest about it, right? And then the people who like, oh, I'm thankful you're honest about it because I go through something similar, or my son did, or my sister, my brother, whoever, right?
Yeah.
And then there are the people who won't say anything, who will look at it and say, well, there's something wrong with him. And that's what happens.
Yeah.
That is the reality, right? So I could sit here as plain as day and tell you that, like, look, I say this while laughing. Like,
Right.
I know I come off as, and I am pretty well-adjusted individual, right? But it's like, you're still allowed to say these are things that you went through. And the hope would be that if I could give somebody an idea of things I did to get through it, then somebody else will be able to get through it, right?
Yeah.
But what happens is there's still got to be that fear of that stigma. And the only way to normalize that is more people talking about it. It's the only way. It's the only way.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And I think that in itself is an important conversation that society needs to have as a whole, and to destroy that stigma. And I think that just even us two having this conversation in its own right, I hope sparks more conversations. And I had a separate podcast interview. This was March of 2021. I had Chris Carlin. He was of 98.7 ESPN, now of ESPN Radio.
Yep. Formerly a WFAN.
Yes. I had him on my podcast, and we talked about it and had a very similar conversation, but admittedly it went on even longer than any one of us could have predicted or even realized at that time, because this was a really big topic for him. And it's like, here we are, we're working in this industry. You're established, he's established, I'm on my way to becoming established as well. And it's like, these are real life things that goes on, that happens away from the mic or away from the camera, that people deal with. And even though we're in the public eye doing what we do, still there's a stigma of like perception, that a fear of how people will perceive them if they talk about these things openly. And I think that it's really great that we're able to have this conversation. We're able to talk about it, and whatnot. And it's not something that like I'm here to try to like turn it into like a long.
It doesn't have to, and it doesn't have to be. And to me, like, part of normalizing it is, and I use that word a lot because it's just a normal conversation. The word normal's in it. Like, there's nothing like, even we're built that, like, if anybody talks about this, it has to be like some event, like Dr. Phil had so and so on to discuss, but like, we could talk about sports anytime we're allowed to do that anytime we want. We talk about girls or guys or whatever anytime we want, right? We talk about sex anytime we want. Like, nowadays, it's like, that's been normalized. That's not a big deal. Like, you got stuff on ABC that like you'd have to like watch on Cinemax when I was my kid's age, right?
Yeah.
But you can't have conversations about this without it being weird, or
Mm-hmm.
like it has to be an event, or it's a 5-part series. Like you can't have, it's just not normal, right?
Yeah.
But why not? Like, why? Like, it doesn't mean it does. Like, everybody has, like, we become people in life. Like, we could talk about, like, bad jobs we had. We could talk about bad experiences with people. We could talk about bad restaurants we ate. We could talk about bad breakups we've been in. But we're not allowed to talk about bad times in our life that we've been through, because then it means, oh, well, there's got to be something wrong with that. Like, well, no, we don't want to hire that person. We don't want to have that person. I don't want you representing me. Well, would you rather have somebody representing you who's going through that right now and is lying to you? Or would you rather have somebody who's honest about, hey, look, we're just human beings and this is
Great
who we
point.
are, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
back of my baseball card ain't going to be batting 1,000. Neither is yours. Neither is anybody listening. But we act in this world like everybody back of their card got to be 1,000. When why? Like, because we cover sports. Like, who the hell cares? Like, who am I? I'm no better than anybody else. But the point is, I'm no different than anybody else, right? So I feel like the athletes who are doing it, it's certainly way harder than you and I talking about it.
Yeah.
But to me, that's why I use the word normalize, because there should be plenty of conversations where life things come up, right? Where we get to know about each other in interviews or whatever it might be. But you know as well as I do, an athlete not going to tell you if he's feeling some sort of way or if he had some sort of thing going on, because the first thing he's going to think about is how somebody can be on Twitter laughing at him,
Mm-hmm.
and that's, or her. But
Yeah.
and that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. That's that way. Yeah.
Absolutely. And to wrap up the second part of the podcast, if you have to look ahead to the first half, just strictly the first half of the 2023 baseball season, there's a lot of questions that are out there, a lot of storylines to watch. And what are your top three storylines that you're looking forward to seeing unravel as the first half of the 2023 season begins in just a few weeks? What are the top three storylines in your opinion?
But I would say number one for me is going to be really throughout the course of the season, the Otani scenario, because it's going to be a countdown. Because every time we're watching an MVP, we're watching a guy who was, I think, Network just had him as the best player in the game, right? So
Yes. Mm-hmm.
we're going to be watching everything he does, and every amazing outing he has, or every home run he hits, or every week that he's a player of the week. It's going to be, where's he going to go? Where's he going to sign? What team's he going to go to? Because we're always more interested in transactions than we are players in the field. So I think that's got to be one. I would say the second thing for me is going to be in the NL West. I think because the Dodgers have been, look, we understand they lost in the playoffs, but they won 112 games, whatever it was. They won
Yeah.
8 divisions in a row. They've been to 3, 4 World Series. They won one of them. I think when you look at the Dodgers, the Padres for years have tried to get past them. And even though in the playoffs we saw they did, in the regular season, I mean, it just had not worked. I mean, the Jace Tingler year, the year they got Scherzer, where the Padres looked like they were going to get him, and then the Dodgers did. Certainly last year. I mean, it's been a race. Remember the Bauer situation when
Yeah.
he was a free agent, the Padres were after everybody, trying to figure out how they're going to cut that gap. Well, if they're ever going to cut that gap, this is going to be the year. They got enough pitching to do it, and depth of pitching. Tatis Jr. may be the best player in the team, and nobody knows what to expect from him, especially playing a new position. You got
Mm-hmm.
Soto, who's trying to play for a long contract of his own. Machado, who just got an 11-year extension right today. So to me, the Padres Dodgers got to be on the list somewhere in some order, because this is a year where it is believable that the Padres could win that division. It's believable
Yeah.
that during the regular season, now look, you'd rather win a World Series, but it's a long season. It's believable they're the best team in the National League West. It's believable they could be the best team in the National League. And then for me, the other one's got to be, I think, the NL East. And I know I didn't look, the American League to me is just pretty simple. The Astros are great. The Yankees are going to be pretty great. And Seattle and Toronto, nobody cares what's in the middle in the Central. Really sorry. And that's just where we're at. Red Sox are rebuilding. Texas is coming, but not quick enough. It is kind of what it is. Orioles are interesting, but they're still young. The National League East is just, I mean, it's a behemoth. I mean, Bryce Harper's not going to be back till the middle of the season, but you've got 3 teams legitimately that are good enough to win mid 90s to 100 games. 3 of them. Now, because of the math and how much they play each other, it probably can't happen. It won't happen. Either that or the Nationals might only win 7 games. I don't know. But I think, but I think when you think about Trey Turner going to Philadelphia, Wheeler and Nola another year. Their bullpen has improved. The Braves did what they did last year without Strider at the end of the year, who's a Cy Young candidate, probably their best pitcher right now, even though he's young. And Acuna Jr. was like a 25% of himself coming off that injury.
Yeah,
I mean, he's going to be way better a year later. He's still one of the best players in the game. And
for
I know
sure.
they lost Dansby Swanson, but Harris is a year older. Vaughn Grissom, we now see every day. Alex Anthopoulos has been a genius over there. And the Mets got Verlander and Scherzer, all the Steve Cohen money. I mean, they're in New York. They got to me, the trio in the National League East and that battle is going to be something to watch all season. And when you
Yeah,
think about all the money that was spent by Steve Cohen in the offseason, this is not just because I'm wearing the hat. The National League East and the Mets in that race, probably top of the list across the board of things to watch going into the season, because all three of those teams legitimately have a chance to win the World Series this year.
absolutely. And on that last point there, I think just thinking big picture
And the rules, of course, not
for
to drop,
like
which we
I
discussed
think
already.
I think
Yeah.
the rules for
Yeah,
me
those are
that's number
but
two.
yeah,
The rules is number two for me. Otani watch is number three.
yeah.
But I do think between the NL East and the NL West, those two divisions are going to be must see TV.
Oh, the whole year. Yep.
Last year did not disappoint at all.
No,
But like
no,
in either the NL East or the NL West, but
correct.
specifically the NL East this year,
Yeah, because now there's three.
because now you got the Phillies, who I mean they're pitching. I think is definitely top heavy, obviously with Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler, but
Yep.
they did a really good job of making sure that their bullpen stays
Bullpen way
intact.
better. Way better.
Alvarado staying there,
Yes.
like Dominguez is staying
Yes.
there as
Yes.
well. And then obviously getting the big fish and signing Trey Turner to that monster
Yep.
11-year contract.
Yep.
That in itself is something that's going to be to keep an eye out for. And then, oh, by the way, Bryce Harper comes back later
Yeah.
in the season as well.
Correct. Right.
So, and then obviously the Mets with the spending that they did, they bring in Justin Verlander, and as well as like a continuation of seeing the core of the team
They won
continue to get
101
better.
games. I mean, look,
Right.
they won 101 games. So it's like, if for all they didn't do down the stretch, they won 101 games. And look, everybody's going to be rooting for the Mets to fail and the Mets to Met, and especially with all the money with all the money they spent. I mean, that's just the way it is. So, but that brings the drama. I mean, look,
Yeah.
it's gonna be a fun season. The rules will bring some changes. I think people freak out about that. We'll have plenty to discuss. But I think it's a top heavy sport right now. It's the 5 teams, 3 in the East, 2 in the West in the National League. No offense to the Cardinals or any, and I like the Cubs. I think the Cubs are better this year. It is what it is. The Brewers with the fighting councils, it is what it is. And then the American League, Yankees, Astros, not in whatever order, Astros, Yankees, Jays, Mariners, and then kind of who else joins the mix. But whoever it is, not going to be as good as those 4 anyway. I mean, it's just, this is a very have not year. I would be, the season hasn't even close to started yet. We're weeks away. And if I asked you, would you pretty much guarantee it's either Astros, Yankees, Jays, Mariners playing either Mets, Phillies, Braves, Dodgers, Padres? Who the hell's saying no?
I'd say
definitely
yes.
going to be one of those 4 against one of those 5. You got 9 teams. The rest of the sport can go home. I mean, I hate saying it, but it really is. Those 9 teams are way better than everybody else. They just are.
Essentially, and especially when you look back at the divisions, the divisional races, and then we're not even talking about the wild card races, which is going to be a whole other story in its own right. Something else to look out for. But to wrap it up, I just want to say thank you, Casey, for coming on.
Anytime, bud.
Anytime, man. And please drop the plug for your baseball podcast on Bleav Network, where fans could actually go and check it out or watch the podcast in whole.
Unfiltered podcast. You can get it on Bleav Network, Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts. If you go to my Twitter, follow me at Casey Stern. You can get up in the bio. Jump on my YouTube channel where I got videos of all the interviews, conversations, and episodes that go along with it. Yeah,
absolutely, definitely must see good stuff from Casey. Casey, thank you for taking the time,
bro.
To come
we'll
on
do this
the
again.
podcast.
We'll do it again. And hey, the Bruins Isles round 1 is a possibility.
It's a real possibility,
So we got to do one that's like a preview of that series, which that series will last about 8 seconds, but the podcast will be longer than the series. But we get but of course, but I'll be excited. Like that's the thing, man. Like, be irrational, be crazy, but be a rational fan. Like, of course, I'm gonna root for them to win. They got no chance, but just don't let it be the Rangers. And I need your help with that.
I'll be more than happy to help there as well. Casey Stern, thank you so much for joining the Shukri Wrights podcast. Definitely had a blast. We'll definitely do this again for sure. And definitely right around the time, hopefully, like when the Stanley Cup playoffs begin.
All right, man. Sounds good. Appreciate you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.